Hello, I'm George Rickman from NetEvents. I'm delighted to introduce today's event, Multicloud and Cloud Native Networking, which will be hosted by our partner, Brad Casemore from IDC. Brad, over to you.
Thanks very much, George. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy the great discussion that we're going to have regarding multi-cloud and cloud-native networking. I'm joined by an illustrious panel today, and you can see that we've got some great representation across the vendor community and the ecosystem that addresses the challenges of multi-cloud and cloud-native networking. I'm joined today, and they'll have a chance to introduce themselves just a little later, but I'm joined today by Sreekanth, VP of Product Management and Marketing at Arrcus, Bryan Ashley, VP of Solutions Management and Marketing at Aviatrix, Jim Brinksma, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Megaport, and Ranga Rajagopalan, and he's the VP and Chief Architect at VMware. They all, I think, can address this topic from slightly different perspectives, but they'll all be tremendously helpful perspectives for you, the audience today, and certainly for the end users in the enterprise community who are looking at solving these problems that are foremost of mind. I just want to set the table before we dive into the discussion in terms of the context, what it is we'll be talking about today, and the perspectives that we'll be getting from our panelists. I want to talk about why multi-cloud networking matters today and why it's become a more important consideration for enterprises and organizations worldwide. And you'll see that it has become, in the slide right after this one, or certainly in the subsequent slides, why it has become, or the degree to which it has become such an important consideration. Clouds, of course, as we all know, you can look at the growth rate of the major IaaS cloud organizations worldwide, whether you're looking at AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or any of the others. You can see tremendous growth rates on a year-to-year basis if you look at their revenues. And that's because clouds have become more important to the realization of enterprise digital transformation. Clouds are not only destinations for workloads, but cloud has really redefined operating models for IT organizations, how they do things, the degree to which they leverage automation for agility, the degree to which they move towards API-based networking for flexibility and openness. And that's where it's also become a key set of technologies that enterprises use. And really, it is a means through which they achieve digital transformation and achieve outcomes related to that, KPIs and other benefits and basically basis of value. We have seen that the growing adoption of hybrid and multi-cloud is not just a consideration for workloads. It has had a tremendous effect on the network, and that's because we have moved from hosting applications in on-premises data centers, which are fixed geographic entities, to a distributed landscape that includes cloud and increasingly, as we move forward, edge environments. And the data center, as a result of that, if you think conceptually about the data center, it's no longer that fixed on-premises entity, but it is distributed, and you need a network that can accommodate for those increasingly distributed workloads. And that means it needs to extend, still support those on-premises environments where applications reside, because not all applications are moving to the cloud. And enterprises have many considerations when they evaluate whether an existing workload should move to the cloud. They have newer applications, cloud native applications, we're going to talk about those, and they also have to decide where those should reside. But the important thing is the network has to be modernized for these purposes. And it needs to be able to bring a degree of simplicity without a compromise on performance and security. It needs to offer elastic scale. It needs to offer many cloud attributes, in terms of being API based and more software defined. It needs to do all of those things, but it needs to do it across a more distributed and complex landscape than we've ever seen before. And at the end of the day, this network, this distributed network, needs to be able to support overall business objectives, right? And enhancing digital experiences associated with application access, whether that be for employees in the organization who are just as distributed, right? They're in fact more so during the last 2 years. And it has to enrich that application access and digital experience. So if we move to the next slide, I want to show some data. And I said I would show you how important this has become. This is a survey that we do on an annual basis, and you can see this one wasn't done that long ago, just last year, 2021. And we asked about how certain factors and application placement and the types of application are affecting technology choices across the wide area network. And you can see this was a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all important and 5 being critical, very important. You can see that there's actually a gradation and they climb as we go through each one. SaaS is very important. It's about 4 if you look out 18 months to 2 years. The dark blue is when the question was asked in the middle of 2021, and you can see it's growing in importance. IaaS growing even more in importance. And then finally, hybrid and multi-cloud strategy right at the top. So it's not trivial. When you get a rate of 4.13 out of 5, you can see that these are very important considerations for enterprise IT organizations and buyers. I want to talk a bit about some of the multi-cloud adjacencies. And up until now, I've been talking about how the network supports workloads and applications across this increasingly distributed landscape that includes not just a single cloud, but multiple clouds and also potentially edge environments as well. But another aspect of this is application access and digital experience. It's the consumption side of things. So you think about a data center network supports server-to-server connectivity and the applications that result in that basically reside in the data center. And now we're talking about where applications are consumed, whether that be branches, remote offices, and anywhere else. But being able to support multi-cloud networking on the access side is also important, right? Because you have to consider things like security, you have to consider things like latency, you have to consider things like overall application performance. So it's the best way to ensure that cloud applications, as opposed to on-premises applications, are experienced optimally by the users. Today, what we're seeing is a lot of work being done by SD-WAN vendors to integrate with cloud, what we call basically cloud transit networks or cloud transport networks. They can be provided by interconnection-oriented architecture and co-location facilities, or by cloud giants themselves. And we're seeing that these interconnection-oriented architectures and direct connects to clouds are becoming extremely important to the application experience in a multi-cloud world at the edge, in other words, in branch offices and remote sites. What we're also seeing, and of course what we'll be talking about today, is basically the way that cloud native is also changing the networking picture and making new demands on networks. Because if you think about cloud native environments, they are not only highly dynamic, but they're also ephemeral. And they are, it's very important that the network be able to support that, from things such as IPAM all the way through to the elastic scalability that's so important when you're in a cloud native world. And we do that through things like ingress controllers, service mesh, and a new technology called eBPF, which is very important. Sometimes eBPF is combined with Cilium. But this is the new landscape we're in, right? And cloud initially seemed like, for many organizations, it was like a credit card swiping them up in the cloud. And when you start with a small number of applications, that's the case. But as you begin to really optimize cloud and look at using multiple clouds and look at using different types of application architectures across these clouds, it can become very complex, and there's a need to simplify it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just a quick slide here where we're looking at the market for multi-cloud networking. And I'll be very clear, this is what we'll call the over-the-top software for multi-cloud networking. In other words, the kind of policy layer, the software-defined policy layer that will govern all of this. It does not include all the transit and transport networks because they can be used for a range of different purposes. Makes this market much larger when you count that in, all the cloud transit networks and cloud WANs. But on its own, this is a very impressive growth rate that we'll see through 2026. It's a 75% CAGR. It will take the market up toward almost 2.2 billion, going from, as you see in 2021, a market of just 133 million as of 2021. So tremendous growth, tremendous prospects, and it all speaks to the problems that enterprises are trying to solve with effective technology. And now we'll move into our discussion. I think at this point, I want to ask each of the panelists to provide a brief introduction of themselves and what they do, and briefly what their organizations do in this context. And we'll start with Sri. Sri, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about yourself and Arrcus.
Absolutely. Brad, it's a pleasure to be in this webinar with all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Sreekanth, VP of Product Management and Marketing at Arrcus. Will be 3 years with the company very soon. Arrcus is a hyperscale networking software company, and our key offer is the Arrcus Connected Edge platform. Our principal thesis is essentially as the application workloads and the digital experience infrastructures gets more and more distributed from the traditional data centers to public clouds, co-location providers, and also the service providers, telco service providers. Arrcus ACE platform provides the fabric that is needed to meet the massive convergence of the compute and the networking that is happening here. The scale is a super important attribute, and do this with a unified workflow orchestration instead of subjecting the organizations to multiple silos. And then the programmability is super important. And as the global 2000 organizations adopt this, they have to have a fabric that serves hundreds of millions of users, devices, sensors, IoTs, and locations worldwide. So with Arrcus ACE, our customers have been able to enjoy the benefit. And that's the short intro from our side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sri. And now we have Bryan Ashley from Aviatrix. Bryan?
Thanks so much. My name is Bryan Ashley, and I'm with Aviatrix. I'm the VP of Solutions Management and Marketing. For those that don't know, Aviatrix is a secure cloud networking platform that provides a ubiquitous platform for public cloud into edge, accelerating business transformation for folks looking to build a environment in the cloud. So essentially, Aviatrix is not a managed service. It's an IaaS-based platform, API-driven, that is able to orchestrate native constructs, allowing organizations to leverage the best in cloud, but provide a repeatable platform that extends across all major public clouds and layers in advanced services, allowing or providing enterprises the enterprise visibility and control that they need. I've been personally with Aviatrix for about 2 years, and then prior to that, I was at the belly of one of these CSP beasts. Was at Azure as a global resource for networking and network security. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And now we have Jim Brinksma from Megaport. Jim?
Hey, Brad, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and good morning, everyone. Jim Brinksma, I'm the CTO of Megaport, and we're a global network service provider with approximately 2,500 customers. We're in over 750 data centers with 240 cloud on-ramps, and we're in about 120 cloud regions. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Jim. And now we have from VMware, Ranga Rajagopalan, who is the VP and Chief Architect there. Ranga, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Brad. Really excited to be part of this panel, everyone. My name is Ranga, and I have been at VMware for close to 3 years now. I was a co-founder at Avi Networks before this, and I joined VMware through the Avi acquisition. So at VMware, my principal job is networking, security, and load balancing, which includes the NSX and Avi products. And from a multi-cloud connectivity point of view, we provide today, we reside in pretty much all the major data centers and provide connectivity, security, and load balancing to some of the largest enterprise customers. We have extended that to include VMware clouds in all the hyperscalers, and we look forward to also extending it to cover all the use cases, including native public clouds, users to applications, employees to applications, and so on and so forth. So looking forward to a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Ranga. And you can see, I'm sure the audience can see, we've got tremendous representation across the spectrum of solutions that are being offered in this space. And let's move on to the discussion. And we'll start with some questions for our panelists. We're scheduling today's discussion in three topic segments. And the first topic is the importance of networking to a successful multi-cloud strategy, and really to the successful cloud initiative, I think, within organizations as well. So let's kick it off with a question to our panel. is networking an inhibitor to cloud and multi-cloud adoption? And if so, how? And we're going to start off with Jim. Jim, I wonder if you could speak to this question in terms of the degree to which network is potentially an obstacle to the realization of cloud success today.
Thanks, Brad. From my perspective, I'd say networking is more of an enabler of cloud adoption, and whether it's public cloud, private cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. I'd actually argue that it's probably one of the most important aspects of the cloud journey for most enterprises or organizations. Whether you're connecting from your customer premises location, to a data center edge, maybe between data centers, from data centers to clouds or between clouds, really the network is what provides the access to the cloud providers and all their associated resources and services that folks are really looking to get to. Without the right network connectivity, the overall experience actually could really suffer. But with that being said, I guess if you look at obstacles, I guess for an enterprise or even some of the administrators or individuals that may be new to cloud networking, when you start looking at called individual cloud provider, specific networking services, some of the initial procedural efforts like, creating your credentials or, getting yourself set up, may be difficult. There's also the educational efforts that are, associated with, trying to understand, the different naming conventions of the features and how they align to other cloud, provider offers, if you will. And then, maybe one of the things that might be an inhibitor, could be understanding how, network egress charges could impact your ability to distribute some of the workloads that you were alluding to, either out of a cloud or even between clouds. But, overall, I believe networking is an enabler, and there's always going to be little, speed bumps or road bumps that you'll have to go over as you're getting your feet wet and learning how to, get into the networking game in a multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. It's kind of funny you mentioned the egress charges. A good analogy is almost like I think we're all familiar, if you go to a nightclub, you usually pay, you pay a fee to get in. Egress is like paying to get out.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And now I wonder, one of our other panelists would like to have a shot at answering this question. Bryan, I wonder if it'd be interesting to get your perspective coming from Aviatrix here.
Yeah, sure. I can. I think so. I agree with a lot of what Jim said, and I think that it's one of the most important pieces to get right. But if I look back at some of even my history back in Azure, it very much was an obstacle for a lot of organizations on their cloud journey. I think it's relatively easy to get started if we're talking about a single VPC or a VNet or something like that, right? And all's well and good. But eventually, networking becomes an n-squared problem, right? As that scale linearly increases, the complexity exponentially increases. And so as organizations are really trying to make a conscious move into cloud, there was a lot of delay around figuring out how to instantiate a framework or a landing zone that would scale over time and support massive amounts of workloads or keep consistent connectivity and redundancy and security governance and all these things, right? As organizations really try to take this seriously. We actually had done an internal study at Azure a few years back, and we found that it would often delay projects 2 to 4 months sometimes on average for organizations looking to go into cloud, as they just try to figure out how to work through some of these networking problems. And of course, you introduce multi-cloud into the equation, and suddenly that gets harder and harder and harder. So I very much agree with Jim. It is quite frankly the most important thing that organizations have to solve for. But because fundamentally the networking rules, the OSI model layers change on us when we go into cloud, it can be a real challenge for organizations to figure out not only how do I connect to the cloud, but then how do I handle connections inside the cloud or across clouds.
Thanks very much, Bryan. And I know, Ranga, you talked about obviously going back to Avi networks and providing ADC and load balancing services. It'd be great to get your perspective on this in terms of what you're seeing as regarding challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I love looking back at history a little bit, and we used to have this proliferation of protocols like DECnet and AppleTalk and IP and so on and so forth back in the 80s, and then along came, and then there was a need for this multi-protocol routers, and then IP came and standardized everything and normalized everything. And so this is a moment like that. We have these major cloud providers who have similar but not identical constructs in terms of VPCs, VNets, how things work, how to secure them, how to do traffic management, and so on and so forth. And every user or enterprise needs a way to connect them, to secure them, to deploy applications on them. And they're all struggling with these myriad differences, both because of a lack of technology as well as lack of expertise and skill set and people out there who understand all of them. So it almost feels like a multi-protocol moment, and I think it has really made networking and security and traffic management very, very relevant and complicated, and that's something that's going to need a lot of work in the next few years.
Thank you very much, Ranga. And Sri, it's time for your perspective on this question, and it's a big question, right? So love to get your angle.
It is, and it's fairly multidimensional. And other panelists, they covered most of the points very well. From the vantage point of where Arrcus is, because we work very closely with many of the global 2000 organizations, what we have identified as an obstacle, at the same time an opportunity, is actually a skill gap. What Ranga said was very appropriate, is as the transition happens, as we see it as two layers: an application connectivity layer and a transport IP networking layer. And the application connectivity layer generally wants to be more abstracted, optimized, and they really don't care for an IP-based network, wherein the traditional transport networking, which is predominantly IP-based, routing-based, BGP-based, protocol-based. So there is an element of skill gap here where the DevOps application connectivity, they really don't worry about the IP-based network. They talk in terms of the Kubernetes tags, labels, C spaces, and everything. Well, the traditional, say, Cisco CCIEs or the internet networking experts of the transport networking world, they generally talk in terms of IP addresses and subnets and MAC addresses and security tables and everything. So these two groups within large organizations have to contend with the networking requirement that is now being put forth in front of them. If it was confined to just the data center, easy. But now, as the other panelists have pointed out, you have the cloud providers with their own constructs, the co-locations and the transits with their own requirements that needs to be met. And then you have the telcos, the communication service providers now offering compute services where the applications are residing, especially the 5G enabled applications and the edge applications that we see. So you now have four big infrastructure blocks that is distributed between data center, cloud providers, co-location providers, and the service providers, telco service providers. Now, the skill gap between two groups have to be somehow bridged, and that is both that can potentially become an obstacle, but at the same time is also an opportunity to unify the workforce and make it more homogeneous and seamless.
It's an excellent reply, and I'm going to come back to you now for the second question in this topic segment. What do you see most commonly as the challenges or the use cases that organizations are trying to overcome for successful multi-cloud and hybrid networking? Or do they start with the security use case in many cases? Are they looking at the cloud routing use case? Are they looking at an automation, trying to sort out their automation for these environments? I wonder if you could provide a perspective on that.
I think that if you take, so we look at it from three different segments, right? The global 2000, the mid-market enterprise, and the small enterprise. So if we were to take the bulk of it is in the mid-market enterprise, and the global enterprise have their own DevOps team and IT team with their own proof of concepts built in. where they normally start is on hybrid cloud, that is on hybrid connectivity. So which is where they take AWS or Google Cloud, they build their infrastructure with the VPCs and the VNets, deploy a few simple workload applications, and then they try to migrate or interconnect their data centers where they have deployed it in the VLANs and subnets with these VNets and VPCs. And as a very first simple step, as part of an eval, they build an hybrid cloud connectivity as a first step to see how well that goes, because you need to provide an on-ramp. You cannot make it into a complete lift and shift. And this is where one of the common obstacle that they bump into is the overlapping IP address. Like the load balancers, when they redirect the traffic, how do you map as part of the migration where the subnet blocks and the CIDR blocks are going to overlap, and how do you manage these applications? So from solving a very simple problem of an overlapping IP address problem, and then enabling an on-ramp, making sure the migration practices are taken care. And many customers that we have worked with, they're sophisticated enough where they want to break this usual three-tier applications. So think of it as a web tier, middle layer, and the database tier. They like to take this opportunity to make it into a microservices, containerize a portion of their workload, and see how well it behaves between a partial deployment in data center, partial deployment in cloud. So these are usually the first steps, the baby steps, crawl, walk, run. This is essentially the crawl and maybe a little bit of walk, and a proof of concept, limited deployment, 1 or 2 regions, and maybe few tens of VPCs and VNets in, say, AWS and Google. And then these are usually the first few steps, and then they plan on expansion based on the learnings that they have.
It makes sense, right? Bite-sized, incremental. You learn and then you go from there, right? Rather than trying to boil the ocean and burning yourself in the process. It makes a lot of sense. Ranga, I certainly want to get your perspective on this. I know you see in your engagements with Avi, you see platform teams and you see modernizing NetOps as they look at these challenges. What is foremost in their minds? And you might break this up into 2 sections in terms of those constituencies, but love to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, definitely, right. So I think she pointed that out well. So we see sort of 2 buying centers. We see the traditional networking buying center, which primarily exists for the data center as well as to provide connectivity across clouds. And then we see you can call it the platform team, you can call it the cloud team, you can call it the DevOps team. They're almost the same thing. They are responsible for keeping and securing the applications wherever they are deployed. They're deployed on-prem or they're deployed in the cloud and so on and so forth. And so the types of technologies that the first team deploys are switching, routing, software-defined networking, and they deal in terms of protocols and IP addresses and subnets and so on, just pure connectivity, bandwidth, latency, that kind of thing. The second team deals with things like DNS and certificates and global load balancing, application level security, things like that. So now what really ends up happening is that there are products and technologies at both these levels that are needed. People have tried to extend one into the other or the other into one, depending on which product and technology you work on, but they don't solve the problem. So what you really need is you need connectivity, you need security, you need SLAs at just the network level. On top of that, you also need application traffic management, application level security, application level analytics, availability, and so on and so forth. So you really need both, and these are different sets of technologies, and they stay that way for the foreseeable future. But what's really changed is the whole multi-cloud has made all of this quite complex. So now you have some technologies that work in a data center, some that work in the public cloud. Take load balancers, for example. ELB that exists in AWS, and then there are counterparts like that in Azure. they all work, slightly different ways. They all have slightly different feature sets. So how does someone normalize around that? I think that is the biggest challenge I see that the cloud DevOps SRE teams face, in both cases.
No, I think that's excellent, and it's interesting what you said. You're absolutely right. As we look up the stack, the responsibilities go to different constituencies. But it wasn't that long ago that the NetOps team would also take responsibility for the on-premises ADC, right? But that's all changing in the whole cloud construct. So it's a great perspective. Thank you very much on that. I wonder if we could get Jim, your perspective on this. You kind of live in the world of connecting clouds, right? Connecting networks. It'd be great to get your perspective on what you're seeing in terms of the top of mind challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Ranga and Sri did a great job of kind of articulating, a lot of the challenges. And I think one of the things to think about is where you are in your life cycle and what challenges you kind of have. And I think that harkens back to one of the things about the resources that you have, their experience with either traditional networking or what's cloud networking today. But maybe I'll kind of bookend it a little bit. I think when you're first getting involved with multi-cloud networking, really is the discovery of some of the network capabilities and trying to really understand what's available, right? Hey, how do I get to the lowest latency, cloud on-ramp? How can I get multi-cloud connectivity with things like a cloud router, as an example? And if you're working inside the cloud, like Bryan alluded to a little bit earlier, what capabilities do you really have within the virtual private cloud networks that exist within each one of the different cloud providers themselves, right? And it really makes it hard to get a clear picture of what I would argue are simpler things like how much bandwidth can you get between something, or what are the actual latency characteristics as you hop between multi-cloud environments. And it's really a struggle to kind of piece all those little pieces together for the puzzle. And this is where I think that is where the right automation, the right tooling, the right partners, and just having the right arrows in your quiver can really help you out.
Thanks very much, Jim. And Bryan, I wonder if we can get your perspective on this. I know you see customers who are dealing with the challenge of hybrid and multi-cloud networking. It's certainly what you folks are doing over the top from a policy standpoint. What are you seeing as the foremost problems when they come to you? What are the problems that are top of mind for them?
Yeah. I think the panel's covered a lot of ground here. So I think what I'll try to do is maybe hit an area that we often don't think about, right? Is if we organizations who, obviously are facing a skills gap with a, often lean team to try to figure some of this stuff out. After they're able to do so, whether it's single cloud or multi-cloud, inevitably they have to operationalize this thing. They have to turn it in and often turn it over to some tier one folks to run and make sure that things are up. And so when we look at sort of gaining visibility, doing common troubleshooting tools, even within a single cloud, again, the rules kind of change on us. We often face that skills gap again as our tier one folks who are trying to manage and service requests that are coming in from their customers or various constituents are looking to try to solve, run-of-the-mill problems. This source A can't talk to destination B. But when source A becomes in CSP1 and destination B is in CSP2, now all of a sudden this becomes a very, very real problem, because not only are there 15 new constructs that our tier one folks know nothing about, but now we have these new concepts of a new clouds. They've got to figure out where these things live. Latency, suddenly becomes a new KPI in a lot of our applications and workloads that has never been an issue before. And the CSPs, at the end of the day, are wildly multi-tenanted. We have hundreds and thousands of customers that live there. So just by nature of that fact, they can't give you the full granular visibility and control. And if they do, customer one is going to see customer two at some point. And so there's a limit to how granular of control and visibility they can provide. And so I think that's a real big problem, even for customers who maybe have spent the time and done the heavy lifting to really figure out how these things start to tie together. Is, as long as everything is up and running, then we're in an okay state. But, the CSPs are they're fallible, just like our on-prem data centers were. And when those things happen, when real world scenarios occur, someone's got to be able to go in and look and see what's happening within the network. And so visibility and enterprise visibility and control becomes a really, really desired thing and a challenge for organizations, especially as they're pursuing sort of a multi-cloud strategy.
Thanks very much, Brian. And it's interesting because one of the things that we've found is that, as we went through it really put digital resilience and application and business continuity in a digital world right at the front of the enterprise agenda, right? And all those things that you spoke about, having a more proactive technological operational approach to day two and day end through things like visibility, within and across clouds becomes very critical to being able to achieve that. So that's an excellent perspective. Wonder if we can move on now to our second topic, and you're going to see the questions here. And now we're looking at best practices. In other words, we talked about the challenges. We talked about the challenges that are foremost in mind for enterprises, but what are the best practices that enterprises should be following? The first question is, how are they addressing the need for multi-cloud networking today? In other words, where are they at this current point in time? And where are they in their evolution to true multi-cloud networking? I know this is more than just technology, it's also operations. So I'd like to start with this question with Brian. It's back to you for this one. I wonder if you could tell us, when you engage with customers, where are they today, and where are they trying to go?
Sure. Yeah. So, I go back to a statement that my mother has told me my whole life, and I'm sure other mothers have told folks who are on the phone. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. And the reality is enterprises are starting to lose some eyes. It was very easy to kind of get started, but, now as whether it's a cost thing, costs have got out of control, or business exposure as things are being spun up is getting out of control, the businesses come in and go, okay, stop. This is getting out of control. We need to be able to put some real structure and have a true strategy here. And so I think that's kind of where what we're seeing with a lot of our customers is where we're at. They've gone into cloud in some form or fashion. Maybe they've tried to figure out some pieces of one cloud and tried to, get structured and organized. But whether it's due to organic growth of the organization wanting to run the best service in the best place, or just get a little bit of cloud optionality in case one of the CSPs has a bad week, or inorganic growth where, a merger and acquisition or a third-party integration kind of forces the hand into multi-cloud. The business is starting to understand, okay, wait, we need some structure around this. We need to be able to operationalize it, right? We've learned some lessons from the on-prem worlds that, one, architecture is important. We need to avoid vendor lock-in, things like that. So looking for ways to start to do things in a repeatable fashion that allows us to really have the control that we need, it becomes very, very important. So I think what organizations kind of start with initially is, they've kind of learned that, okay, when I first started in cloud, the CSP told me, just all you got to do is get here, we'll solve all your problems. They kind of learned that, okay, well, maybe that's not entirely true, but it's definitely not true in a multi-cloud world. So I need another alternative. I've also learned that I need to be able to move fast. The promise of cloud is endless compute and storage, and this wonderful thing called agility, which means I can go super, super fast anywhere in the world. However, these networking challenges, as we've already been discussing, can often slow us down. So a lot of organizations start to look at infrastructure as code, right? Now, our networking guys who've been responsible for our on-prem networks, they're not coders. Our dev guys are. But this presents kind of another learning curve here. And so I think what we're seeing right now from organizations in terms of that evolution, they all have a goal of, okay, IAC is the answer. We need to start on that, but maybe we're 10%, 20% there. We do see a lot of our customers, if I look over the 550 customers that we have now, there's a handful that have, pure CI/CD pipelines where they're actually pushing this stuff out, but most kind of snicker and say, yeah, we got plans to, but we're not quite there yet. So I think that's kind of where we're at now, is organizations are kind of realizing, the shine has worn off a little bit. They know that they have to augment some of the native tools with additional components to be able to really do things in a multi-cloud yet repeatable way, so in a way that they can control. But then they also have to embrace some new technologies. They have to look at things like automation to be able to continue to move fast and leverage all of the beauty of cloud.
Yep. No, that's excellent. And you're right. It's a challenge of meeting them where they are to take them where they want to be, right? And there's obviously a lot in that. And Ranga, I welcome your perspective on this. What are you seeing? Are you seeing a lot of organizations that are sort of hybrid and wanting to move to multi-cloud? And I wonder where you see them today, and where do you see them in terms of where they want to be?
Yeah, the one word answer, Brad, is early.
Yep.
And then I really loved Bryan's analogy about the eye, and I want to extend that to say, it's not if someone loses an eye, it's when this organization is going to lose an eye. And usually the key is security. Every organization is going to get breached. It's going to get hacked. And when that happens, the question is really, how far did that spread? Where did that spread? What applications, what got hacked? Do we have full visibility to contain the breach? And what do we do about it? And usually without, let's say, a good multi-cloud networking and security story, which frankly no one has, the answer is, you don't know. And it's going to take, days and weeks of a lot of work. And even at the end of it, you don't know. So that's what ends up happening. And it is, again, it behooves us as an industry to provide the right solutions in a way that people can actually use, as opposed to saying you all need to get PhDs in every networking technology and security technology and application delivery technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are two ways to address the complexity problem, and you've just covered it. But one way is skills upgrades, but as you said, that takes time and it costs a lot of money, right? And the time is really prohibitive for most organizations, the time it takes to do that. Or, vendors can help and suppliers can help by basically making the complex simple, right? And I think this is the opportunity for the vendor community. Jim, what are you seeing? I mean, I imagine you see a whole range of use cases at Megaport in terms of where the organizations are today and where they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll echo some of the comments from the previous panelists, but maybe have a little bit more of a positive spin. I'd say over the course of the past few years, maybe 5 years, it was much harder then to enable multi-cloud, and like Bryan alluded to, most basically stayed within one cloud, right? Because that was where they started from, right? And now on their journey to do multi-cloud, even just adding a singular additional cloud, it's going to be for reasons like having best of breed products or the ability that they feel more comfortable because they have upskilled or things along those lines, right? But today, I think it's a little bit easier for folks because there are now products and services that have been created to basically enable and drive multi-cloud adoption. I mean, great examples of things like that are like we've had customers spin up over 600 cloud routers, and on average we have about 14 services on each one of those, right? And then for us with Megaport One, we've now provided the ability to go through the cloud and also start to deploy clusters and cloud native workloads and applications. But we're definitely seeing the advancement of folks wanting to be able to do more multi-cloud sorts of capabilities, and I think that's just going to continue to progress.
Thanks very much, Jim. And Sri, I'm gonna give you obviously an opportunity to answer this question, the one that basically speaks to where organizations are today as they move toward a more sophisticated approach to multi-cloud networking. And then I also want you to follow up. So you're gonna get a two-parter. It's a little more complicated for you. And the next question is, what criteria should they use to evaluate potential solutions? So start with where they are, and then maybe you could speak to the criteria they should use too. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think Ranga mentioned it as a one keyword, early. So that is spot on. It's early because if you look at the life cycle of application workloads and then where they are in terms of distributing across multiple clouds, even though we work with many Global 2000 organizations in 3 different continents, it's still very early because the percentage of the workloads that are actually in the cloud versus wherever they are distributed on-prem and other places, the distribution says that they haven't crossed that halfway mark in many places. Yes, we do have organizations who are completely cloud native. They have decommissioned their data centers, but they are still a handful, at best a few dozens. Now, what is it that is more important in their evolution? I think the key word in this is the true multi-cloud. The word true is my keyword there. The most important is control. So as much as the application workloads and digital experience is there to delight the end users, the IT and the DevOps teams today have to make sure both from a 24/7 always on application access and access from anywhere in the globe, just when the users in US and North America are going to bed, the Japan wakes up and Australia wakes up. So you have to make sure it's 24/7 always on. And the third is about security that Ranga covered very well with respect to the needs as you distribute the infrastructure. And the fourth is the ability to respond. So there is a response in terms of calculation that the CIOs use, the mean time to resolution, the MTTR keywords. And there are some very strict MTTRs that are being followed today, and there are some stiff penalties around it. So the ITs and the IT teams and the DevOps team have to make sure that they have a significant amount of control as the applications and the workload get distributed. So what is more important here is the life cycle of the multi-cloud networking solution itself. You can say that depending on the size of the organization, they can outsource this, delegate it as a managed service, or they can inherit and manage the life cycle, saying we as a team are equipped to manage the life cycle of the solution ourselves. So it's a self-managed versus third-party managed. And third-party managed is still in its even early stages because one of the main inhibitor there is nobody wants a console on top of a console. That's one of our customer said that in a very funny way. I said, what do you mean? It's like when you go to CSPs, they give you a console, an AWS console or a Google Cloud console. When a managed service comes and gives a console on top of a console, the element of control is abstracted even more, and that makes it that much harder to manage the full life cycle of the solution. So the control and your ability to manage it and manage it in a self-managed way is what we are seeing more and more in the organizations that we work with. So that actually leads to the criteria, right? Like when they do the eval with us, the eval success criteria broadly falls into, I would say, 3 categories. The first category is, even though we talk in multi-cloud networking, cloud native networking, the transport networking, the layer 3 networking with respect to the routing architecture, the performance associated with it, the scale that it can handle, and of course, the IP level security, All of this have to be integrated. You cannot think in terms of silos and think in terms of completely disjointed set of networking capabilities. The layer 3 transport networking has to be very intelligently, tightly integrated with the application connectivity networking that comes on top of it. So the second category that they then think in terms of evaluation is how cloud native it is and how much of it is the application connectivity needs that are met here. The application models are varied here, right? A lot of the organizations that we work with, they are actually still in their bare metals. And today the CSPs provide bare metals and the co-location providers, they provide bare metals. So there are, as part of the evolution, they are looking at applications running on bare metals, predominant application running on virtual machines. And then, of course, they are adopting the microservices containerized form factors. So you are now looking at a hybrid mixed mode deployment that resides both in the CSP infrastructure as well as on-prem. And then you have to contend with the VM networking, the bare metal networking, and the service mesh. The Istio service meshes with their sidecar proxies and everything, they all have to exist side by side. And a lot of the customers that we work with, they have a self-managed network. That means they are very well into their adoption of Kubernetes. They have multiple Kubernetes clusters. They have worker nodes running everywhere. And the transit architecture that they adopt have to be evaled before even it goes to production. So that's the second big category that we are seeing as part of the eval. And the third and the most important, because you can think of it as deploying the application seamlessly, efficiently, but that's just a day zero eval. The day 1 and day 2 eval is all about automation, orchestration, management, monitoring, and troubleshooting. All of this they all dovetail into this category of how do we automate all of this? How do we orchestrate this from a central location? And how do we programmatically make sure there is a self-healing side to this network that is built in? All of this have to be defined. So now you are getting into the realm of APIs. It's like how much of this can be done API driven so that there is no manual intervention. How much of this is framework driven? Like Bryan mentioned, infrastructure as code. So a lot of the DevOps wants to manage this using the frameworks. The Terraform frameworks is very popular out there, and they solve a lot of the deployment issues. For the CCIEs and some of the internet networking experts, the Ansible playbooks are very important because it helps them to automate the configuration changes and the change controls that comes into it. And then you have the deep visibility and observability platforms. You can have all this all day long, but if you don't have a 24/7 real-time observability platforms where you have the hooks put in place and you're able to see the application flows and be able to proactively identify before it becomes a bottleneck. More often than not, it's a brownout condition, not a blackout condition.
Right.
The performance degrades. It doesn't reset on you, but it is practically unusable. So how do you go about identifying those brownouts and make sure the application experience is not degraded for the end user and be able to troubleshoot this? How do you identify this as part of the eval criteria and be able to put together a test plan that you test it ahead of time? And when you're testing it, it's not just for your one cloud or two cloud, it's a distributed cloud infrastructure, and there should be a meaningful test plan that covers all of this infrastructure together. So in summary, those are the three categories that we look at for the eval. You do key consideration, start with your transport networking, look at your routing architectures, the performance scale, all those attributes. Look at it from a cloud native in terms of the mixed mode models, because it could be a VM, a service mesh, or a bare metal, and then they can be deployed in any which way they want. And third is your ability to do both the day 1 and day 2 operations in terms of monitoring, management, troubleshooting all together. So that I would say is the three categories there.
Thanks very much, Sri. I do want to give each of you an opportunity to briefly state, universal considerations that customers should be thinking about in this realm when they make decisions. And Bryan, I know you mentioned the day two issues and being able to have full observability for actionable insights on a continuous basis. Is that something that you advise? And I wonder if there's anything else you would advise, and then we'll move on to.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's critically important. We can't forget that at the end of the day, we have to operate these things. Whatever we build or stitch together, be it single cloud, multi-cloud, there's going to be a time when it breaks, and there's going to be a time where someone has to drill in and see what's going on, or twist a knob, do something to change directions of flows or networks and network traffic. And so we need the ability to, one, be able to have our tier one folks who are doing that have the data to be able to make decisions, and then also be able to have the control to go in there and take some action. I guess the only thing I would add to that, maybe just real quick, is we have a saying here at Aviatrix about you can be cloud native or cloud naive, and it's a difference of one letter, but it's a world of difference for organizations. And so I would say, as we're looking at potential solutions and customers are looking at potential solutions, Sreekanth kind of touched on this a little bit through API integrations and things like that, is this idea of being cloud aware. Right? Fundamentally understanding that you're running in cloud. There's a lot of solutions that we look at that, quite frankly, don't know the difference between running in cloud and running on a virtual box on my laptop. Right? They're still looking for cables and interfaces. And when the fundamental rules of networking change on us, right, it's critically important. Ranga mentioned this earlier about security, right? Just the different level of exposure that we have when we go to cloud. And if we fundamentally don't understand that the networking rules are changing, right? If we're cloud naive, we're not really adding a lot of value there. That cloud native and that cloud awareness is key in really looking at solutions that can help organizations as they try to solve some of these real problems.
Yeah, the cognitive omission of that T can have tremendous costs, right? You want to be
Indeed.
native and not naive. Ranga, I wonder if you could very quickly state the criteria that you advise clients to consider.
Top 4 or 5, right? 1, first of all, do you connect all the clouds and your data center? 2, do you offer the SLAs that I need in terms of bandwidth, latency, and so on? 3, is it API driven, and is it automated? Can I get it quickly when I want it? 4, is it secure? 5, do I get visibility of what's happening in my network and what's happening in terms of my security and so on and so forth? And last but not the least, is it available? Right? Yep. Is it always there? So these are the 5 or 6 that I would look at, and always those as a user, those would be the top of my mind.
And Jim, I would imagine you have certain key considerations that you recommend customers follow too.
Yeah, I mean, it was covered really well by everybody else. I mean, I'll just step back for a minute and say, when you talk to clients or customers, it's really understanding what specifically they're looking to do within clouds. And within what regions, and how you can kind of reach out to get to them, right? People aren't doing multi-cloud for the sake of multi-cloud. There's got to be a reason for you to, go after, specific cloud providers in specific regions to derive specific products and services, right? So I think it's really trying to understand what the catalyst is for, what someone's trying to do. I think is probably the first thing. And once you start to realize what people are looking for, it can lead you, in the right direction, right? So I think that's, one piece of it. And I think afterwards, again, I'm just going to echo what folks said about automation, right? And being able to have the appropriate tooling, not only for day 2, but moving forward. And I think the last thing that I would kind of echo here is that, really having the ability to look at metrics, across all of the different clouds and be able to make those metrics actionable. And then looking at, more, I'd say advanced features like prediction capabilities and things along those lines. So that would probably be a top view for me.
Excellent, excellent. And now we'll move on to the next discussion topic. And I know it's been one that we've touched on already, and it involves cloud native, basically, and how it affects this whole range of challenges that we already discussed. Of course, when you think about cloud native, you've got things like CNI plugins, right, for Kubernetes at the lower layers, for the fabric. And then as you move up the stack, You've got things like ingress controllers for north-south traffic into clusters and across clouds. So, you could call that northwest, you call it north-south, and sometimes, you may have ingress controllers across clusters and clouds, and you could potentially call it east-west. And then you get within the cluster and you have to deal with things like service mesh up at the application layer. And, things like sidecar proxies and so forth. It's a whole different world, and it's built for environments that are highly dynamic, inherently distributed, and ephemeral. And I wonder how this complicates things. And we'll start, Jim, with you. Like, how does this complicate what customers need to do as they move toward more adoption of cloud native?
Sure, Brad. I think you just touched on a lot of it. It's a pretty broad spectrum. So, obviously, there's a couple ways you could answer this particular question depending on an individual's perspective. So, maybe I'll just break it down a couple ways. I mean, the first way you can look at the use of cloud native network functions, or CNFs, which are arguably a successor to virtual network functions or VNFs, right? And these would be cloud native if they're containerized. They leverage microservice architecture. They scale horizontally and vertically, like we talked about, and they're compatible with technologies like Kubernetes and Docker, obviously, right? Alternatively, a network service that's native to a specific cloud or a specific cloud environment, like a virtual private cloud, as an example, or to get between different clouds in a native way, you'd have to be able to reach it via a cloud router or a product like that, and be able to leverage, a variety of cloud on-ramps, as an example. But I think overall, people are now starting to look at a more holistic approach. So you look at how you have SD-WAN on your customer edge, and how that interacts with maybe a cloud native WAN, and how that interacts with cloud routers at the provider or data center edge to enable multi-cloud, via your on-ramps, and allow you to consume the products and services that you're looking for. But I mean, it's so multi-layered that you have to look at it from a variety of perspectives. And I think each one of those has a means to optimize, and a means to look at.
Absolutely. And Ranga, I wonder if I can get your perspective on this. And I do know that obviously you see a lot of this within your customer base right now. So.
Yeah, no, it just becomes a hairball. Everything works great in one within a single Kubernetes cluster. You can deploy applications, you can secure them, and so on. The minute you expand out of a single cluster, whether you have two clusters or you have a mix of cloud native applications and a simple thing as a database that's running outside, things get really complicated. I mean, it's as simple as Bryan mentioned. Just allow application A here to talk to application B. No one else other than A can talk to B. That, just enforcing that, let's say from an application that's sitting in Kubernetes to a database outside is immensely complex. The reason why it's complex is because you're crossing NAT boundaries. You're crossing different domains of subnets and IPs and overlays and things like that. And now extend it to saying that, oh, this service running in this VPC in AWS, only this service can talk to this database that's sitting outside in my data center. Oh boy, it just gets totally complex. And so this mix of multi-cloud networking and cloud native and non-cloud native applications, and the need to connect them, secure them, and observe them is just tremendously complex. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of unsolved problems out there, and needs a lot of work to solve them and make it easy to consume. Right?
Absolutely, it's kind of funny. I think folks said earlier on this discussion at an earlier topic stage, they said cloud starts relatively simple, right? It's a credit card swipe for developer, and you get up there and it's one VPC. But now we're moving into layers of complexity, and cloud native just compounds it, right? And I wonder if we could get, obviously, Bryan, your take on this. I'm sure you see customers who start off moving, doing VMs in the cloud and moving as existing applications to the cloud. This is probably an added complication for them, I would imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Jim probably started off best by saying, this is a deep topic that we could probably have spent the whole day on. But it's funny when I'll just stick to kind of one area of this, which is this concept of refactoring, right? Customers going into, they're lifting and shifting applications into the cloud, and then they see these wonderful PaaS services that are out there, these cloud native applications, excuse me, where suddenly the infrastructure goes away and they can just consume the service, right? And it's this nirvana. And already, Ranga mentioned some of the complexity of, okay, well, if I need to lock that down, if we talk segmentation or macro or micro segmentation perspective, that's one thing. But even when the customers first start to use the service, they don't even realize that it comes with networking implications. There's certain services have control plane features that have to go out to the internet. And guess what? That can't go through your next gen firewall. It has to have an exception to go directly out, or some services are just open to the internet by default. And so now some of your security guys come in and go, wait a minute, why has my list of my audit list increased by a factor of 3? So I think those are implications that a lot of these cloud native applications can even have on the framework and the architecture itself. And so just one, being able to understand that, we've talked about kind of this skills gap or learning curve throughout today. The reality is that never really ends. That kind of just follows us for the length of our journey. And so whether we're initially going into cloud, we're refactoring applications to leverage these great new cloud native things, there's always these catches or these little caveats that have networking implications that we have to solve for. So I think that's kind of one of the ongoing challenges, but also something that really, to do this right, we have to think about, know that that's going to come, and look at solutions, what in processes to be able to accommodate for those things.
Absolutely, and it really puts the onus on customers to look for that simplicity, right? Making the complex simple, and to think as far ahead as they can, because I think you said earlier they could have M&A and a whole bunch of other things, and you want to make sure you have an extensible model for that, right? And that you're able to accommodate it. So I think
exactly
it's a great point. And Sri, I wonder if you could touch on this and the 2 dimensions of it. We'll handle both of them, because I think the others already have done an excellent job of this.
Yeah.
How it changes things and how customers should be thinking about cloud native and incorporating it into their network architecture.
For the customers who are on this webinar, my suggestion is please keep it simple. It's as simple as, like, for example, in the on-prem world, Microsoft Active Directory has been around and has done a phenomenal job in granularly controlling so many things. When the applications move into a cloud and become cloud native, as simple as understanding the security groups, as simple as the IAM privileges, as simple as how the route tables are managed on a VPC by VPC or a VNet by VNet level. So these are somewhat basics, fundamental, foundational, and having a good, solid policy understanding around how they impact your application is super important. Whether you do lift and shift, reformatting, or go through the full 7 layers of changes that the application goes through, irrespective, there's these foundational blocks, and having a policies around them, having a good understanding of how does this map from when the application goes from a Microsoft Active Directory based granular control into an IAM security groups based. You can implement all the changes all you want, but if the foundational changes are not policy driven, as more and more applications go into your cloud infrastructure, and you go to multiple cloud infrastructure and not having this homogeneous control, over a period of time, you see these deviations that happen across in the application infrastructure, which never really existed in your data center or on-premise. And that's when the problems start to get exponential rather than linear. So as we work with some of the large global organizations, the very first thing that we recommend is, what is your security group policy? How does it map to your on-prem? And when you make it cloud native, are you looking at the packaging of it? How does the control for the IT, control for the end users all are mapped together? And in the process of doing this, if you were to upgrade or migrate into the next version of it, or how are all these changes carried forward without complicating the whole infrastructure? So more often than not, all the access issues gets blamed on the networking, wherein some of these policies are the one that are the root cause of it. Networking shows us a symptom of the problem, but the root cause is on some of these policies. So the rest of the panelists touched on a lot of other good issues, but what we see as a equally important issue is have a very solid multi-cloud networking policy that is intertwined with the application access, application control, also the application security, and then have a meaningful foundational framework around it. And as they expand into multiple cloud, multiple regions, and multiple providers, then you have a very homogeneous way of expanding it without getting into serious issues.
That's great advice. And I think part of it is keep that policy model as simple as you can while still achieving your objectives, right? It's important to keep it as simple as possible from the outset. And I think now we're at the point where everybody gets a chance to very briefly think about it. You can think about it as a soundbite. You can think about it as a final takeaway, as the most important thing that you think the audience should take away from this discussion today. And you each have about, unfortunately, 30 seconds to do it. So Sri, we'll start with you. What's the takeaway that you think the audience should walk away with today?
So the key takeaway here is have a holistic model. So when it comes to multi-cloud networking with cloud native attributes built into it, look at the full networking stack all the way from layer 2 to your layer 6, literally, whether you talk in terms of the sessions, containers, C spaces, IP addresses, MAC addresses, subnets. So if the problem or a lot of the issues that the organization faces because of the siloed thinking that happens here without a deep integrated approach as a single stack for your multi-cloud requirement, you are likely to get into many of these issues. So approach it as a single stack, and you will be able to see a tight integration between the underlays and the overlays and the automation and orchestration put together. And it will scale well and perform well, and that will be a true multi-cloud solution that you can go after.
Excellent. Bryan?
Yeah, great. I would say the big takeaway for me today here is that, look, we spent time talking about, look, networking is complicated in the cloud. We have skills gap. It's going to continue to be complicated as the CSPs innovate or we look at new challenges and problems. So, as organizations are really looking for partners and solutions inside of the cloud, look for those folks who can provide the kind of thread that perfect needle of allowing you to leverage what's good in cloud, but then also being able to do that in a consistent way across clouds, right? So it's the ability to solve the problem of operationalizing things, allowing that for that repeatability and giving you some consistency inside of the cloud, but then also being able to fill some of the gaps where some of the cloud native solutions may fall a little bit short. However, when the new CSPs are innovating and we have these cloud native apps that we want to leverage, we need a solution that has the intelligence to do that. So going back to that cloud awareness, it can't just be solutions that just build overlays on top of cloud. We need something that fundamentally understands cloud, understands how we're connecting to cloud, whether it's with different kind of connectivity providers like Megaport or SD-WAN, being able to bridge all of those worlds together in a centralized platform with a centralized control plane has shown success for a lot of our organizations.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Ranga, I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Sure, yeah. As of now, at least, Brad, I think both multi-cloud and cloud native are almost like islands, silos, with maybe irregular ferries between them. But that has to change. What we really need is to be able to interconnect clouds, cloud native and non-cloud native applications, secure them, and so on and so forth. I think, like we discussed early, most organizations are early, and so they have kind of siloed off these things, and that's how they're solving or going along now. But going forward, we have to make these interconnections secure, easy, available, and also ensure that it doesn't require rocket science for people to be able to deploy and consume them. Right?
Absolutely, a lot of automated intelligence so that you take the complexity out of it, but you aren't making compromises, right, in terms of the capabilities. And Jim, I imagine many of these themes resonate with you as well, but I wonder if you could wrap it up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, from my perspective, and I think in summary for many of us, right, multi-cloud, networking in general is a highly complex topic, right? But really it's all of our jobs to simplify it and make it easy to consume across the market, right? And if I just step back and try to oversimplify a little bit, it's really all about reach, discovery, and choice, right? And if I bring it to the workload perspective, what it really comes down to is, some of these workloads are going to need to be deployed to specific locations, whether for data sovereignty reasons, regulatory reasons, performance reasons, et cetera. Some we're going to need specialized components that may only live in one cloud or another. And others are just going to require high speed, low latency network connectivity. But no matter what, any one of those drivers happens to be, having network reach, the ability to deliver the right solution is ultimately what's going to make us all successful.
I think that's a great summary. And my takeaway for this, and I think you heard it from all of the panelists, and I've heard it directly from customers that I've spoken to in my capacity at IDC. Many of them have said, and perhaps they forgot the T, right? I've heard many of them say, I didn't realize the network infrastructure implications of going hybrid and going multi-cloud, and particularly going up the stack to cloud native. I didn't understand the implications. And I think one of the things that you've heard from our panelists is, please understand the implications. And if you really have the right criteria in place, you can make this journey, you can simplify this journey to a large extent. It's still a complex, don't get me wrong, but I think we heard some great ideas from the panelists on how you can simplify this.